There's a land of boundless beauty where the untamed rivers run and majestic snow-capped mountains rise to meet the morning sun. There are silent...
My name is Jim Learning. I'm a part of the Nunatsivut Community Council. No, I'm a member of Community Council. And what I have to say is unfortunately, very quick. I have to get home, look after dogs. For me, it's about the environment and the indignation around us as a people being ignored, being downstream from this miserable project, meaning that the dam can break and come down, the water can come down and see us real quick, and the food will be poisoned over time. We have thousands of years food supply, secure food supply, and fish and seals, and that will be impacted by the doubling of the methyl mercury. But those are all facts. I think you know that. My emotional feeling around it is, as I think should be recorded, is that it's terrible to have somebody do this to you. You have no idea how your dignity suffers, and I suffer from not being treated fairly. I really do. That's a bad thing for me. And not only that, the methyl mercury is dangerous for our future. If you think Aboriginals are slow and behind and can't quite keep up, go ahead. Load in the neurotoxins, slow them down even more. And we know dams are not clean, so I don't have to go into that. I'll stay with the emotional stuff. And our fight, of course, is through the United Nations, UNDRIP, and GADU, that gives us some hope of dignity in this process, which we badly, badly need. And I can't imagine a democracy your size and with your intensity over just casting that off and say, well, there's an expendable population. We can be a part of that. Sure, why not? Our government can do that, or whatever that is, our administration. We're the government. I got to turn that around. And so that's my beef with this, and not very well put here today, unfortunately. I'm campaigning. I kind of got that on my mind as well. So anyway, that's my piece for this, is we need dignity, we need respect, and we demand respect, and we hope for dignity. And you have to respect that to give us the dignity we're losing. Thank you very much.
Okay, 60% of wildlife around the globe is at risk because of fossil fuel burning, underground mining, and all other manner of human population greed. It affects us locally with mining in Boise Bay because it threatens the caribou herd population, which for decades we have depended on for subsistence because of the high cost of living in northern communities. Now it threatens our fish because of the construction of old technology hydro dams. I would like to share with you my statement my fellow ex-con land protector Marjorie Flowers was going to read at the Muskrat inquiry, but I'm assuming the inquiry got wind of it and wouldn't let her bring any paper into the inquiry. First of all, this is not reconciliation like Liberal leader and Canada's Prime Minister Trudeau promised. Trudeau has turned this country into a militarized state after seeing the Wet'suwet'en Nation being arrested for defending their territorial homeland. The Wet'suwet'en are leaders, and I'm so proud and honored to be in the company of them as we are defending our waterways, culture, and the environment. I witnessed for the first time in my 48 years Labradorians working together, whether Inuit, Innu, or settler. We are defending our right to live as we are. We shouldn't be criminalized or sent to prison. We are protecting our own lives, ensuring our families are safe from this hydro dam that destroys and adds to environmental destruction. What I demand to know is my right as a tax-paying Inuk woman of this province, as a native of this land. At the end of this inquiry, will those individuals like Danny Williams, who first proposed this project, Kathy Dunderdale, who followed through the project and sought federal funding to proceed, Stan Marshall, his predecessor and successor, Dwight Ball, when he was appointed the Aboriginal representative, NELCOR executive directors be held accountable and be reprimanded for what they have done, and continue to do all for a lousy buck. Will there be an independent study on the North Spur? Sorry, my phone is going off. Will the vegetation be cleared? I found out one thing about myself after being arrested and incarcerated at HMP throughout that terrible ordeal. I am not a puppet. I choose every day not to allow this colonial oppressive state to dictate my actions. I have to choose every day because we are still defending our way of life in provincial and Supreme Court for almost 3 years now. After hearing about the Brazil dam break, where 166 lives were lost and 147 missing, only fills me with a continued drive to fight. I choose to do my best, just like everyone here, to protect those I love. So I can't give up until there is an independent study on the North Spur and the vegetation is cleared. Despite being diagnosed with PTSD from being imprisoned, even after seizures for the first time in my life, because my brain doesn't want to believe that people can be that cruel, even after all the panic attacks, after all the harassment by cops and others who want to keep control, I will always choose to fight. I'm not a criminal. Even the criminals in HMP knew that. I want real justice at the end of this inquiry. I want those who sent us to prison for trying to protect our own lives from muskrat sent to prison themselves. I want an independent study on the North Spur. I want the vegetation cleared, but I don't get what I want. So I have to choose to fight every day to protect those I love. Why am I being criminalized for exercising my right to peaceful protest and on my homeland? Twice now I had the opportunity to see a psychiatrist but missed both because of short notice to help with my PTSD. I also had the chance to take sick leave, but I couldn't afford it because of the high cost of living this project has caused. Personally, I am tired of NELCOR trying to silence us. I'd like answers to these 4 questions through this inquiry. 1, will those individuals I mentioned earlier be reprimanded? 2, will there be an independent study on the North Spur and be publicly published? 3, will the vegetation that can cause methylmercury in the river be cleared? And 4, why am I being criminalized for defending my way of life and those I love? So I wanted to put a personal human story on this conference today, and I hope you heard me. Thank you.
I am of Inuit descent. My family's been here in this area for almost 200 years. I wanted to do this. I just wanted to speak with you because we have been here in our area thinking we're all alone, but finding out that we're not. We have many people like you outside of this area. I'm sorry. who is on our side and who will help us also. We've been trodden on here by our own government, our own laws, and we need other people to stand up and help us get through this. We're fighting for our land, for our rights. We have, like I said, our own government who is against us and using our law against us to incarcerate us for standing up to try to preserve our land, our way of life, our culture. I was born on the bank of this river, the Grand River, the one they're polluting, in a little tiny clinic almost 58 years ago now. My mother was born across the river from this area where we live in a place called Traviston. Her grandfather actually purchased a parcel of land there, and it's been in our family since. Although nobody lives there, there is a small cemetery there, and we're afraid when this dam breaks, it'll take out that little cemetery. I'm also concerned too with the clear cutting, not only for the methylmercury, but for the corridor that's going to lead down through to the States for the hydroelectric project. I guess to get the electricity down to, they clear the land, they use herbicides, it pollutes, like in our area, we're very sandy, and it would just seep into the sand and get into the groundwater. It'll affect animals, birds, insects. It will come your way too. That'll go through to your home, through your properties, through your places you love. I'm sorry. And it seems there's nothing we can do that would change the minds of these people who think they're doing wonderful things by these hydroelectric projects. They are neither clean nor green nor needed. I'm just glad you fellas are here to help out, and I know there's more people. I'm glad you're on our side, and I appreciate and thank you for even being here today to listen. Thank you so much.
Good day. My name is Eldred Davis. I'm a Labradorian. I was born in this community, and something like Peggy, I grew up with the river in my backyard, basically. My brother lives in the house that I spent most of my early years in, and that house had to be moved at one point because the river was starting to get a little eroded, and closer to his house, it had to be moved. I guess that's just a small indication of what would possibly happen if the North Spur fails, which is a natural but slightly upgraded by the contractors, Nalcor contractors, to what they consider a fortified natural dam. We don't think, and the quick clay experts in Europe don't think it'll work either, and we certainly don't trust Nalcor, and we have our reasons. I, along with Roberta, was involved with the joint provincial federal environmental assessment. It took a lot of research, a lot of time, and a lot of items came up. And I couldn't hardly believe when I began that an organization like Nalcor, which is supposed to be working for the people, would be blatant liars. They came up with their conclusions that favored them in several aspects of wildlife, damage to the land, the waters. Everything seems so easily done and easily justified by Nalcor. A good example, and I've used it a lot of times, Atlantic salmon is a prize fish for sportsmen, and Atlantic salmon do ascend Muskrat Falls. Not huge numbers, but enough that is a stock of salmon that will, if they continue on and that dam works long enough, will go extinct. They came up with several items that in their attempt to convince people that salmon don't go up there. There's at least 3 elaborate items that they did with involving a lot of research, testing, radio tracking of salmon. In their minds, we would be convinced that salmon don't go up this river. Of course, a lot of local people who had spent time up there know that that's a pile of horse pucky. They know the salmon have ascended that falls, and Nalcor just basically invented these reasons and tried to convince people, not very successfully, that these salmon do not go up there. It would have been a hurdle for them if people had been told the truth that salmon do go up there, because there are Atlantic sports fishing communities, organizations, volunteer groups, and so on that strive to keep these salmon populations up, because it's a viable sports fishery. It's great for the people that travel from far away, and businesses make a lot of money off this. That's one example. We have numerous examples. One, you're all aware that songbirds are right now going through a horrific decline in population and species. And there's one place just a few kilometers, 10 miles maybe, upstream from the Muskrat Falls dam site. And it's, I guess you call it a bird rookery, or raising and breeding of at least 3 species of sparrows concentrated in this one spot, along with several other songbirds and waterfowl. And in the winter, there are ptarmigan, snow ptarmigan, an Arctic species more or less. Canada geese stay there in late summer when they're molting. That is one of only 2 areas along this river, which is several hundred miles long, where those songbirds congregated for centuries, probably. Nobody knows. That's underwater now. No birds can spawn or breed there anymore. It's just happened, and nobody seems to care. Especially the promoters of this dam, they don't even look at this. It's just another example. Like there was maybe there are a few survivors of a relatively rare woodlands caribou population that centered more or less around this area, the Red Wine Mountains woodland caribou. Last numbers I heard that had some plausibility was maybe 22 animals. And we told Nalcor if they continue with this project, if they actually start the project and continue with it, that herd will go extinct. I don't know if there is a single animal alive there now. There may be, if they've escaped all the noise and the construction, the laying of cables and whatever goes with a hydro project, including significant damming. I don't know if any survived. If they have, they're the last of that herd, I can guarantee you. So these are examples. I could go on a long time, but there are other people who want to talk, and I hope you realize just how it affects the people here to see these species die out, our land is destroyed. I've traveled that river from Churchill Falls to Goose Bay 8 times, and it's always a pleasure to be on the river. And if this dam is built and the next one they talk about that Gull Island is done, it won't even be a river. It'll be 3 stinking industrial reservoirs. The river will have gone. You probably didn't know that there actually was a significant falls on this river at one point. It's called the Grand Falls, 3 times higher than Niagara Falls. It's a trickle now, and sometimes it runs practically dry. That's an example of the destruction they have done to make few politicians and construction people and their buddies rich. Everybody else suffers. I think I've had enough to say. Thank you.
Hi.
Hi, Marjorie. Good to see you.
My name is Marjorie Flowers. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
I'm an Inuit woman from Rigolet in Nunatsivut. I moved here to the Upper Lake Melville region of Labrador in 2003. Rigolet is a predominantly Inuit community on the coast that's further out the inlet from Goose Bay, about 120 air kilometers. And the population where I grew up, and all my relatives who still live there, friends and family, still depend on the fish, the migratory salmon, the trout, smelts, shellfish, migrating birds like the geese and the ducks that my friends just talked about. I suffer from knowing that the environment is so tragically raped and destroyed here, right in our backyard, in our home. But more importantly, is I'm seeing the destruction, the blatant and brazen destruction of my food source. Today, just today, because it's spring hunting time, and the spring seal hunt is on. And I'm not talking about an industrial seal hunt. I'm talking about subsistence seal hunting for food. Today, my nephew is out on the ice today to bring me back a meal of seal meat, because it's what we do, what we've done for hundreds of years. In the spring, we go up on that bay, or out on the bay from here, and we hunt the seals. And we come back and we cut it up and we fry it and we eat it. And the seal, next to human in this area, is the highest animal in the food chain. Now, I know generally how the accumulation of methylmercury happens, like the lower down at the bottom where this like smaller plankton and smaller organisms live in the ocean or in the river, in the Tarrington Basin from where we are now. The small levels of methylmercury, but as the higher levels, the bigger animals, the fish eat, there's a bigger and bigger accumulation until when it reaches the seals, what I eat, what my family eat, what my friends and community depend on. When they eat those seals, there will be a dangerous amount of methylmercury in those seals. And right now our provincial government is telling me and telling us here in this group and telling Labrador and telling Inuit people and Aboriginal people, Indigenous people here in this land, that they will not clear that reservoir. They will not take the soil and the vegetation out of that because they said it was too much money, it would cost too much. Although they've already gone about $8 billion over budget. They can't take the topsoil off to prevent that development and accumulation of methylmercury, which is like beyond comprehension to me and so many other people, why they would neglect to do that, why they would choose not to do that. I don't think so much of it as neglect. I think it's outright decision-making around power and greed, like Beatrice talked about. It's not that they don't know, it's that they don't care. They don't care about us. Yeah. And I need, if anything, I want to get that message out to you today, that we are a small group of people here that what you see in this room and a few more have decided not to be the passive group of people anymore. And I mean, there's hundreds of people now in this area that have just now accepted, because the government kept moving forward. Nalcor kept spending money. The federal government kept sending down billions of dollars. So we were up against this massive, massive industrial undertaking that we had so little power over. Well, all we can do is protest at the gate. And that's what we were doing. We were very peacefully protesting to say, with our signs and banners and Labrador flags, to say, we want you to clear the reservoir. Please just tell us that you'll clear the reservoir or do something to mitigate this problem. Never done. Ignored completely by the Premier. Ignored completely by our MHAs. Ignored completely by Aboriginal governments. Yeah. So we're left to our own devices to stand up and to speak and to share the message in some manner. It's so frustrating. It leaves me in a place of utter frustration when I start to talk about it, because we have beaten our heads against a brick wall with our own leaders here in this land. And people know what's going on, but for whatever reason, there's people bought off, there's people paid this amount of money, and there's division amongst the groups purposely perpetrated by our own government, so that to silence us and to remove us from standing up for what is right. And this is right. What we're doing is right, and we need your help to spread this message. This dam is wrong. This dam is environmentally unsound. This is not a green project. This is devastating our culture. This is devastating our land. This is devastating my food chain. And I want to absolutely get that message out to you. Please tell 3 people when you leave there today. When you leave that place today, go and tell 3 people. And they hopefully will tell 3 more people. Because what you're buying in power coming down into the United States is what I find equivalent to the blood diamonds in Africa. So that's all I have to say. Thank you for listening.
Hi, my name is Amy Norman. I'm an Inuk woman born and raised here in Happy Valley Goose Bay. My family is from Northwest River, Nain, and Nunatsivut, and also Newfoundland. You know, my fellow land protectors have talked to you a lot about some of the most important issues with this project, such as the methylmercury contamination and how it affects our food webs and our culture, such as the North Spur and its instability, and how we're fearing for our lives because the structural stability of this megadam hasn't been properly looked at. All these really big, scary things. One thing that I want to talk to you guys about is a bit more, I guess, it feels a bit more abstract. So I'm going to talk to you about the UNDRIP, which is the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. So if you're not aware, this is an international instrument that was adopted by the United Nations in 2007 to enshrine the rights that constitute the minimum standards for the survival, dignity, and well-being of the indigenous peoples of the world. And I will say now that, most of our group, most of us are indigenous. There's a large proportion of us that are Inuit, Southern Inuit or Métis, and Innu. We also have many settler allies. So, our fight and our resistance to this project, it has to be, I think you can't ignore Indigenous sovereignty and Indigenous rights when you're discussing this project, in addition to all the other, kind of abuses of power that come with this project. So I'm back to UNDRIP. It protects the collective rights that may not be addressed in other human rights charters that emphasize individual rights, and it also safeguards the individual rights of Indigenous peoples. So it's basically this big 46, it's a big document with 46 different articles that outline the rights of Indigenous peoples. It was adopted by 144 countries, with 11 countries abstaining and 4 countries voting against it. And the 4 countries that voted against it were Canada, the US, New Zealand, and Australia. So if you think about those 4 countries and what they have in common, it's settler colonialism. The UN actually said themselves, Australia, New Zealand, Canada, and the US, these share a very similar colonial history, and as a result have common concerns. Each nation argued that the level of autonomy recognized for Indigenous peoples in UNDRIP was problematic and would undermine the sovereignty of their own states, particularly in the context of land disputes and natural resource extraction. So, you have these 4 superpowers basically being the only ones in the world opposing the rights of Indigenous peoples because they're worried about resource extraction. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to quickly read a couple of the articles that are outlined in UNDRIP and talk about how Muskrat Falls violates these articles. And then I'm going to tell you what we've kind of been doing on the international side, trying to get the United Nations more involved with this. So, Article 8, Indigenous peoples and individuals have the right not to be subjected to forced assimilation or destruction of their culture. I think this is a really important point when you're considering methylmercury and methylmercury contamination caused by the vegetation in the reservoir of the dam, because our governments have essentially decided to not do anything about it. They are choosing to contaminate our food webs. That's our traditional foods. That is our link to our culture. I don't think the importance of those food systems cannot be overstated. You know, who we are as Inuit people, you know, really, like, we're seal people. That's who we are. That's who we've been for millennia. You know, we rely on seal for food and for clothing and for warmth. You know, the oil, that's who we've always been. And suddenly, you know, that's being threatened. So that's Article 8. We're going to scroll down to Article 19 states that states shall conduct and cooperate in good faith with the Indigenous peoples concerned through their own representative institutions in order to obtain their free, prior, and informed consent before adopting and implementing legislative or administrative measures that may affect them. This idea of free, prior, informed consent also comes back in Article, anyway, the number's not important. Basically, free, prior, and informed consent, I'm sure most of you probably understand the concept, but it's the idea that every Indigenous group has to, you know, consent to anything happening on their land. And it has to be given freely without, you know, bribes. It has to be done before anything happens, so prior, and informed. You have to have the full picture. And when we're talking about Muskrat Falls, free, prior, and informed consent doesn't exist because we have 3 different Indigenous groups in this area. We have the Innu, we have the Inuit of Nunatsivut, and then we have the Southern Inuit and the Métis of Nunatsivut. When the provincial government was first, you know, starting with this project, they only talked to the Innu. They kind of took this really hardline stance, being like, no, it's just their land. It's only them. They talked to them. They had a, you know, a benefits agreement signed, and they ignored the Inuit and the Southern Inuit. They basically kind of drew this line on a map and said, this is the only tiny little area that's going to be affected by this project. The reality is, what is, you know, traditional Inuit territory is just downstream from this river, right? So all of the methylmercury contamination coming up here from the dam flows down onto our lands. So it's not like we're not affected. You know, it's still coming onto our lands, but because the project itself is a bit upstream, they decided not to consult. So we never gave free, prior, and informed consent. And the other big article number I'm going to mention is Article 32. Indigenous peoples have the right to determine and develop priorities and strategies for the development or use of their lands or territories and other resources. Yeah. So I mean, there's so many things wrong with this project. I could literally sit here and talk to you for hours about it. But one thing we've done, so on our end, in terms of the United Nations kind of side of things, when the resistance to the project was kind of like at this big boiling point in 2016, there were a group of us who got together and we sat down with the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. We went line by line, looking at every single article, and we wrote out exactly how Muskrat Falls violated each single article. You know, it was this massive, like 50-page document. We submitted it to the UN. But, you know, the group of us that were writing this, you know, we're all, you know, young women. A lot of us were just like still in university. We don't really have an understanding of how these things work in terms of how to petition the United Nations. You know, it's such a big entity. So that didn't really go anywhere. We never heard a response back. flash forward to just, a couple weeks ago, actually, we submitted another document, and this time we had some help from some great allies who kind of have done this thing before. So we knew what to be writing and how to submit it, and we knew the kind of pathway to the United Nations a little bit better. So this time we were giving submissions to the United Nations Special Rapporteur on Toxins, because he's going to be coming up to Canada to make a visit. And he was, I guess, opening for submissions to see exactly how Indigenous peoples in Canada are affected by toxins. So we, wrote up a big article about methylmercury because that's our kind of focus on the toxin side of things. And I think that's available online, and we can, make sure you guys have the links if you're interested. But yeah, I don't know. Not sure where else I'm going to go with it. I'm going to pass it off to someone else, but oh, no, I do have one more point. Sorry. I just remembered my point. One big takeaway that I want you guys in your group to have in particular is thinking about like the greenwashing of hydroelectricity, because a lot of politicians, and in particular, like politicians on the left or like, these like liberal types, they tend to champion hydroelectricity as this wonderful green, resource, and it's going to save us. And I really want you to take what we're saying and see how destructive it is to us, to our homes, to our way of life, to our culture. See that destruction and know the truth about hydroelectricity, and do what you can to make sure your part of the world isn't complicit in the destruction of our humanity, right? Like it's important to stand up for marginalized peoples, or however you want to word it. But I think as long as you can kind of see through the like neoliberal greenwashing of hydroelectricity and think about the people who you are actively harming when you are championing this green energy. So, anyway, thanks.
First, I guess I want to say is thank you guys for listening to everything we have to say. And another thing is, from what I understand, you are concerned about what's going to happen to your environment when all of this clear cutting or whatever it is that has to happen in order for the power to get to your part of the world. I would like to invite every one of you to come to Labrador and see how beautiful it is here. There was a lot of devastation, a lot of damage done over the years. And I think, I'm not really sure what it's like in your part of the world, but I'm sure, you're going to see some devastation once this starts. I don't think it's worth the electricity that you may receive, or the next state may receive there. Anyway, my name is Linda Saunders-McLean. I live in the flood zone, and I'm very emotional about this. I have a grandson that lives with me, and a daughter, and of course my husband, and we love to fish, we love to hunt, we love wild food, and my fear is that one day my grandson, he's only 2, that he won't get that opportunity to learn how to set a net, how to clean fish, and even eat the fish, because it will be so poisonous. In the Upper Churchill and Churchill Falls, which is the other huge project that's about 40, 50 years old now. If you, like I said, if you ever come to Labrador, go to a place called Esker. They have these huge fish that you can catch, and they're contaminated. There's signs posted everywhere warning people not to eat the fish because they're so contaminated with the methylmercury. And that's my big concern, that once this horrible project gets once it's basically full blown, that it will contaminate and poison the fish, and we will see signs everywhere to say caution. And another thing is, we don't have a lot of faith in what the government says, our government says. We don't have a lot of faith in what the engineers says in the NALCOR project. And the thing is that I do believe that that dam will give way because of the quick clay, like Roberta had mentioned earlier, and it will kill us. It will flood our properties. It will destroy our homes. There's a small community not far from us now that has already been flooded even before this project is finished. And people have lost homes because of the greed of Nalcor. That's all I can think of it as. And I see that something that's going to be happening. That's our future. I see it. I have no doubt in it. So if you guys are concerned about what's happening in our part of the world or what may happen in your part of the world, I welcome you to come to Labrador. You can come and stay in my home. If you want to come and you want to check it out yourself, just to see the damage that this huge project has created and continues to damage our environment, it's horrible. And I can't think of any other word to think or say, but like the other people in our group had mentioned that our government has fallen down on caring for all of the people of this province. And I'm so disheartened with the unconcerning and the negative attitudes that they have towards us. I'm a social worker, and most of the children on my caseload are Innu and Inuit. And they come from devastating homes where there's a lot of drug and alcohol abuse. And a lot of those families are employed by this project. So just because there's a lot of money that's flowing due to this project, there's a lot. It's not just the methylmercury, not just the fear of the damage of the dam, but also the loss of culture, families, and lives. And there's nothing good about this project. But I thank you guys for listening.
But I am far richer.